We live in a world that has long misunderstood what true power looks like. For centuries, feminine energy, gentle yet fierce, intuitive yet wise, has been overlooked, undervalued, or forced to fit into a mold it was never meant for. But something is shifting. All around us, women and those who embody the feminine are remembering who they are. They are rising not by abandoning softness, but by reclaiming it as strength. This is not about overpowering, it's about awakening. Awakening a power that has always lived within us, waiting to be remembered, re-embodied, and expressed. Today, we explore how that awakening unfolds. The awakening of feminine power often begins in a moment of quiet recognition, a deep, unsettling awareness that for too long something essential has been muted. We begin to notice the ways we've been taught to doubt ourselves, to shrink, to stay agreeable even when our inner voice is screaming. From a young age, we absorb messages about how we should behave, what's acceptable to feel, and when it's better to remain silent than to be seen as too much. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, we disconnect from our true voice, the one that knows, that questions, that dares to speak truth even when it's inconvenient. This is not just about individual experience. It's generational. Many of us carry the weight of stories passed down by mothers and grandmothers who were never allowed to express their full selves. Their strength was real, but it was often hidden behind masks of endurance, modesty, or silence. And so, we internalize this legacy without even realizing it. We move through life with a subtle tension between who we are and who we've been told to be. But awakening begins the moment we notice that tension and choose to listen more closely to our inner knowing. It might feel like a whisper at first, a gentle urging to question, to resist, to remember. We start asking, whose voice is this in my head? Whose approval am I seeking? What truth am I afraid to speak? And in the asking, we begin to unearth buried parts of ourselves. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about returning to who we've always been. Feminine power doesn't explode into being. It stirs, it rises, and it calls us back into wholeness, one brave breath at a time. Would you like me to expand the next key point in a similar tone? Feminine power deepens as we reclaim what has long been dismissed: our intuition, our emotional intelligence, our inner rhythms. For too long, the world has elevated logic over feeling, reason over instinct, and productivity over presence. But feminine energy doesn't follow a straight line. It flows, it senses, it feels deeply. And in that fluidity is immense strength. When we start listening to our inner voice, not the loud one trained by fear or external validation, but the quiet, grounded knowing within, we begin to move differently in the world. We start trusting ourselves even when it doesn't make sense on paper, even when it goes against what we've been told is rational. There is wisdom in the way we feel. Emotions are not weakness, they are messages. They show us what matters, where the wounds are, and what needs tending. The feminine awakens when we stop apologizing for being sensitive, for needing space, for choosing rest, for feeling it all. That sensitivity is not a flaw, it is a superpower. It allows us to connect more deeply, lead more compassionately, and create from a place that is rooted in truth. When we honor our cycles, our emotional waves, our energy shifts, our intuitive nudges, we begin to experience alignment. We stop pushing against ourselves and start moving with ourselves. That's where the real power lies, not in forcing, but in flowing, not in pretending we have it all figured out, but in being brave enough to listen deeply and respond with authenticity. This reclamation isn't loud or dramatic. Often, it looks like saying no to something that doesn't feel right, even if it looks perfect. It looks like slowing down, softening, and choosing ourselves. And in doing so, we awaken a power that leads not from control, but from connection. Would you like me to continue with point 3 next? As we begin to heal, we rewrite the stories we've been told. We learn to feel our emotions fully without making them wrong. We reclaim our bodies not as objects to be controlled or critiqued, but as sacred vessels of wisdom and experience. We tend to the inner child who learned to hide in order to be safe, and through this process, something profound happens. We begin to trust ourselves again. We realize that the very things we were taught to suppress our vulnerability, our sensitivity, our need for care, are not flaws to be fixed but doorways to deeper power. Healing the wounded feminine isn't a one-time moment, it's a continual unfolding. It's in the daily choices to speak kindly to ourselves, to honor our no as much as our yes, to feel anger without guilt and joy without restraint. It's in the way we allow ourselves to be held, in friendships, in community, in spirit. And it's in the fierce grace we extend to the parts of us that still feel afraid. We stop abandoning ourselves in order to be accepted. We stop hustling to be worthy. Instead, we root down into the truth that we are already whole. In this healing, we come home, not to a perfect version of ourselves, but to a more honest one, a version that doesn't need to be polished to be powerful, a version that leads not from armor, but from presence. Feminine power awakens in the cracks. In the moments we choose softness instead of shame, connection instead of comparison, wholeness instead of performance. And with each choice, we don't just heal ourselves. We shift the story for those who come after us. That is the quiet revolution. That is the power of the awakened feminine. Would you like to continue with key point 4? Feminine power doesn't need to shout to be heard. It doesn't need to dominate a room to be felt. It lives in what might seem small at first: grace under pressure, presence in chaos, compassion where others choose control. This is the essence of soft strength, and it's one of the most misunderstood qualities in our world. We've been conditioned to see power as force, as certainty, as constant forward motion, but feminine power is something entirely different. It is not loud, but it is unshakable. It bends, but it does not break. It creates space rather than taking it, and in doing so, it reshapes the world around it. To embody soft strength is to lead with both heart and spine. It means we do not collapse under pressure, nor do we harden to protect ourselves. We learn to stay open, even when it's uncomfortable. We allow ourselves to be moved by life and still hold boundaries that honor our worth. There is great courage in choosing empathy over ego, intuition over impulse, peace over proving. This strength is not the kind that burns out or wears armor. It's the kind that regenerates because it comes from alignment, not performance. Soft strength is not passivity, it is presence. It listens deeply before it speaks. It walks away from what is not in integrity. It nurtures growth rather than forcing outcomes. When we embody this kind of power, we show up differently. In our relationships, in our work, in our leadership. We model a new way of being, one that doesn't separate strength from softness, but allows them to coexist. And in doing so, we create a world where others feel safe to do the same. Would you like me to expand on key point 5 next? The awakening of feminine power reaches a pivotal moment when we stop living for approval and start living in alignment. For so long, many of us have shaped our choices around what will keep us accepted, admired, or simply safe. Saying the right things, doing what's expected, suppressing parts of ourselves to fit into roles that never quite felt like home. We become experts in performance, wearing smiles when we're exhausted, staying quiet when we long to speak, saying yes when every cell in our body wants to say no, and we begin to believe that this is who we are. But deep down, a quiet truth persists. This is not alignment, it's survival. Feminine power awakens when we dare to step out of performance and into authenticity. It begins when we ask, gently but honestly, what do I truly want? What feels nourishing to me? What am I doing out of fear? And what am I doing from love? These questions are not always easy to answer, especially in a world that constantly tells us who we should be, but they are essential. Because living in alignment doesn't mean we never face fear or discomfort. It means we stop betraying ourselves to avoid them. When we choose alignment, we begin to trust our own timing, our own voice, our own pace. We allow our desires to guide us, not shame us. We understand that our worth isn't something to be earned through productivity or perfection. It's something we carry by simply being. And as we begin to live from that truth, something shifts. We no longer need to prove ourselves. We no longer shift to be palatable. We become magnetic, not because we're trying to be, but because there is nothing more powerful than a woman who is fully herself. Would you like to continue with the final key point? Feminine power, once awakened, naturally begins to extend outward. It does not remain isolated within the self. It wants to connect, to uplift, to co-create. Unlike traditional models of leadership that often emphasize hierarchy, control, or competition, awakened feminine power thrives in collaboration and community. It recognizes that true strength is not about standing above others, but rising together. It sees the brilliance in others and feels no threat, only inspiration. This is where feminine leadership becomes transformative. It doesn't divide, it weaves. It doesn't conquer, it nurtures. It doesn't hoard power, it shares it. When we live from awakened feminine energy, we begin to show up as mirrors and mentors. We no longer fear another woman's light. We celebrate it because we've come home to our own. We create circles where stories can be told without shame, where vulnerability is honored, and where success is measured not just by what we achieve, but by how deeply we love, how fully we show up, and how generously we support others. This is how the personal becomes collective, how healing becomes movement. Feminine power also honors the wisdom of diversity. It understands that strength doesn't come from sameness, but from the richness of different voices, backgrounds, and ways of being. In this space, there's room for everyone, not because we've made space through permission, but because we've claimed it through presence. When women lead this way, when anyone leads this way, we create more than change. We create legacy. This is how feminine power truly awakens, not only in the quiet personal shifts, but in the ripples it sends outward, through connection, through courage, through rising not alone but together. Would you like a conclusion to tie everything together? Here is a conclusion that brings the full speech together with clarity, strength, and heart. Feminine power does not arrive in a flash, it returns in layers. It awakens in the stillness, in the reckoning, in the quiet choice to come home to ourselves. It begins when we notice how we've been silenced and choose to listen to our own voice again. It deepens when we reclaim our intuition, our softness, our sensitivity, not as burdens, but as brilliant sources of strength. It grows as we heal what's been wounded, as we rewrite the stories that told us we were too much or not enough. And it strengthens when we embody soft power, when we lead not by force but by presence. Living in alignment instead of for approval is one of the bravest acts of awakening. And when we make that choice, again and again, we become grounded, clear, unshakable. From that place, we naturally begin to lift others. We become part of something larger, a collective return to a more whole, human, and heart-led way of being. This is how feminine power awakens, not as a rebellion against the world, but as a reclamation of our place within it. Not through control, but through embodiment, not by becoming someone new, but by remembering who we've always been. And as we rise, we don't rise alone, we rise together. So let this be the invitation to listen, to heal, to trust, to soften, and to lead from the truth of who you are. Because that truth, that presence is power. Would you like the full speech formatted together for delivery or printing?